about the first promise, which is, ladies and gentlemen, the economy. And I've told you what has been done to the economy. That is the first promise. Is there more that could be done? Of course. This is not sufficient. It is not enough. However, it helped us to avoid defaulting. It stabilized our currency and inflation went down. Of course, our GDP is growing. There is somebody who asked a question one day and said that when William Ruto took over, the exchange rate was less than 130 to begin with. So why on earth would you use 130? Yet we even know that during William Ruto's reign, the exchange rate went to 160. And the expectation was that it was going to hit 200. So if you found something at 120, let's say, and it moved under you to 160, and now it is 130, how can you take credit and say that, you see, I stabilized the currency? Well, ladies and gentlemen, that doesn't make sense as if you look at it from the face value. However, if you understand how Uhuru Kenyatta managed to get us to have that 117 or 120, then you would be like, okay, well, you stabilized the economy. You stabilized our currency, I mean. I want to give you an example. There is something we call subsidy. So Uhuru Kenyatta, during his reign, would say Kenya is going to pay, the Kenyan government is going to pay Kenya Power or Kengen so that electricity is subsidized. Now, if you remove that subsidy, you get the actual cost. That is the same thing that was happening with fuel. If you remove the subsidy, whatever it is that the government is injecting in, what government is covering for you, you get the actual cost. That is what was happening with our currency. We were paying a lot to keep our currency stable. I am not kidding. This is something you can take your time here and verify. We were paying to prop up our currency. And so Ruto said, no, we are no longer going to pay. And when he said so, do you know what happened to our currency? Our currency went from around 110, 115, 120 to 160. So to bring it to 130, that is what is called stabilizing it. Because this is now being, you are now at 130 without having to pay for it to be at 130. The other time you are at 120, the actual rate is supposed to be maybe 160, but you are stabilizing it artificially. Now somebody is just using the laws of business to ensure that it is 130. That is the explanation behind we have stabilized the currency. I believe that is making sense because there's somebody who asked that question. Why would you say this? But I've told you, if you are using another means to keep prices low and those means are removed, the prices will automatically jump up. So if we are buying fuel at 159 a liter, because you are subsidizing, then we subtract whatever it is that you are paying the oil marketers in the name of subsidy so that we can get the actual amount. How much is fuel worth? And you can check the records then. If you removed how much we were paying in the name of subsidies, fuel was supposed to be 213 Kenya shillings. And William Ruto removed those subsidies and fuel is still around 180 or 170 something. So that is what you say, I have lowered the cost of fuel because the real cost without subsidy was this. I hope that made sense, ladies and gentlemen, because that was a very important question that had been asked by someone who wanted to know why would we claim that somebody has done this when in essence they have not done it. About economy, I would ask, we leave it there. There is a lot, like I said, that we could speak about in terms of the issues of economy, and it will take maybe the entire night, which we both don't have. Now, let us go to the next promise that William Ruto made, ladies and gentlemen. And so, the next promise, I hope I'm still visible. Am I still visible? I believe, is agriculture and food security. I've already touched on this, but I want us to take it from this angle. Kenya has agriculture as the backbone of the economy. We are not industrialized per se. We are going there, but you cannot say that our economy is backed by industry. Ours is agriculture-backed economy. And so agriculture is supposed to provide both jobs and food. For the longest, ladies and gentlemen, successive governments have not been deliberate to make agriculture work because it is not lucrative since it involves the ordinary mwananchi. So what did Ruto promise to do when he takes over? I told you when we were looking at the UDA manifesto, just the summarized version of the things that he promised. He said he was going to do something about agriculture. And as I said, doing something about agriculture meant making agriculture to provide both food and also to create jobs or create income. So there are two things that William Ruto boldly promised. He said he was going to subsidize production and not consumption. And then secondly, he went and said he's going to move Kenya from rain-fed agriculture to water-fed agriculture. In fact, somebody laughed when he said that then. But even of late, when he's already president, he reiterated the same. So what was the objective of subsidizing? What did he mean by subsidizing production instead of consumption? Well, this was the issue of inputs. If you can have cheaper fertilizer and cheaper seed, then it is going to allow you to produce more. And ladies and gentlemen, about 1.2 million bags were given to over 3 or 5 million farmers who were registered. I personally am a beneficiary of that because all we had to do was to register, then you'll get an SMS. It is that SMS that you go with to the nearest cereal board, and then you take your fertilizer. Fertilizer during Uhuru Kenyatta, just to refresh your memory, was retailing at 7,500. William Ruto subsidized it to 2,500. The word subsidized here means the government is paying the rest. So this was a subsidy. It is not like he just decided to move the price from 750, from 7,500 to 250 magically. No, it was a subsidy. Only that he said, instead of giving money to those who mill unga, to unga millers, instead of giving them money, he gives the money to the farmers, those who are supplying inputs also, so that the farmers can get this thing cheaply and produce. What happened? The harvest doubled, and Kenya got over 70 million bags of maize. What we need as a country to be secure is 80 million bags or thereabout, and we got 70 million bags. So the deficit was now 10 million bags. That is why today you don't see those funny images that we used to see of Kenyans in other parts of the country eating. You don't see Kenyans from other parts of the country like Turkana, like places like Baringo, eating funny things as it was the case. Remember, every year we would be having Kenyan for Kenya. being moved by people like Jeff Koinange. We don't have those ones under Ruto. Why? There's no magic. You produce more food. You make sure there's food for Kenyans. Kenyans are not begging today for government assistance. It is there because there is that food. So that is the power of subsidizing production. Now, it's not fully done because input does not stop at seeds and fertilizer. There is a lot that goes into farming. Those of you who do farming can say that there's a lot that goes into farming. And farming, by the way, requires a lot of patience because there are times that you would really lose. Like in the last harvest, we really lost. The rains did not deliver as expected. And that takes us to the next promise that William Ruto made. He said that if Kenya is to produce enough food, then we must move from rain-fed agriculture to water-fed agriculture. And this is self-explanatory, but as you know, Kenyans, we like politicizing everything. So people thought that he did not mean what he meant. What Ruto meant is, and just for purposes of clarification, what William Ruto meant was simple, that if you are going to depend on rain, then rain will let you down. But you see, if you have water that is consistent, whether it rains or it doesn't rain, you will produce whatever it is that you want to produce. That is why places like Mwea, they don't depend on rain to produce whatever it is that they are producing. They do the production because they depend on irrigation. And you saw an example at Galana Kulalu. That is something that had been abandoned, but now has been revived. And if you saw the amount of maize that is being harvested in just the few acres that they are using for pilot, you'd be shocked. And William Ruto is saying, if we can irrigate 1 million acres, then the issue of food will not be our that we can export. Ladies and gentlemen, what Ruto do about sugarcane? Because this is still farming. You see, in Kenya, sugarcane industry was dying, just like the milk industry, just like the coffee industry, just like the tea industry. These were all dying. So what did he do? He deliberately stepped in to revive the sugar industries. They were kind of privatized. But today, and if you're from Western or from Luo Nyanza, you can confirm this. Today, the farmers are paid on time. Those who work in those sugar mills are paid on time. And Ruto is even insisting that there should be a bonus for farmers. So these are deliberate steps that he made. Ladies and gentlemen, just as a summary under agriculture and food security, the president subsidized fertilizer. Over 1.2 million bags have been given to 5 million or more farmers. And it is a continuous process. The president also promised to revive water-fed agriculture. And currently you are seeing irrigation in Bura, in Galana Kulalu, these things are being revived. And the idea of building 50 major dams is not for the sake of saying it. The idea is that if we have these major dams, then water won't be a problem. And so long as water is not a problem, Kenya is blessed with fertile soil. We will farm and we will produce enough food for local consumption and, of course, for export. Kenya is bigger than Israel. Kenya is bigger than Netherlands. Yet those countries are exporting a lot. That is because they made deliberate decisions. These decisions are not easy to make. You make them, you will find the status quo fighting seriously. But what sets you apart is the ability to say, this is the hill I am dying on. And Ruto said, I am going to remove the subsidies. He removed the subsidies. And remember, people even went to the streets with sufurias on their heads, demanding the subsidies back for unga. But then they found themselves buying unga at 100 shillings. And then the story changed that it is God who gave us rain. Ruto cannot take credit. But when the prices are high, God doesn't exist. Rain doesn't exist. It is Ruto who is wrong. You know our politics. That is how we do it. There was bumper harvest, which I mentioned. And of course, there is something that went unnoticed. In counties nowadays, especially if you go to cereal boards, you will find that there are grain dryers so that you can harvest your grain instead of depending on the sun to dry these things. You can just take them to be dried for you. And these things are happening to ensure that farmers don't incur unnecessary losses, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that was explained well. If you have a question about that, you can ask, then we proceed under agriculture. Any questions? If you do, just ask. Okay. Any questions? Are you still there? Am I still audible? Am I visible? Okay. I believe I'm still audible and still visible. Now, I want to go to the education. Education was also another promise. And I mentioned early that CBC was served raw. It was not well cooked. Whoever wanted to launch it said, let me launch it and fix it on the way. And while that has advantages because it is a practical leadership style where you say, let us do this thing. The challenges we are going to face, we will meet them head on, as opposed to refusing to do it with the hope that eventually we will fix everything fast before we run it. So there is an advantage. The disadvantage is you should also have a budget for it. It's not just a matter of saying we are going to have junior secondary school without building the classes for those junior secondary schools and without hiring the teachers. Because if you're coming up with a new system, ladies and gentlemen, that new system must have funding. It should be funded. And so William Ruto promised that when he comes in, he's going to do major reforms. And today, as we speak, over 70,000 teachers have been hired, which is the highest in the history of this country. And so these people going to grade 9 and others have teachers. They're not just going there to sit in classes without a teacher. 2, the classes were built. Remember when William Ruto agreed with members of parliament to build junior secondary classes for the junior secondary in the primaries in every ward that they had. And they did that. That was about 58 billion that was given out to build those classes. If you come to Mta, if you are in Mta, don't take my word for it. Just go to the nearest primary school and check if there are new classes there. Those classes are meant for the junior secondary. And so he deliberately tackled this issue of CBC. But that is not where William Ruto stopped. As you can see, the budget increased exponentially. This is the highest education budget we've had in the history of this country. And the reason as to why this budget is high is because it is targeting to ensure that whatever it is that is promised, the systems that are introduced are funded. You cannot have systems that you can't fund. So that is why the budget was higher. Now, there is the controversial university funding model. And this is, I'm calling it controversial because people decided to politicize a good idea whose time had come. And this, unlike others, they politicized because of selfish reasons. I want to give you a very sad statistic. And this is also verifiable. People who come from poor families have the lowest chance of stepping into a university. There are places in the country, ladies and gentlemen, where an entire ward doesn't produce even a single person who goes to university. That is not some stories, Ajaba. That is a reality people live. If you didn't go to these big schools, you know very well that in your school, perhaps you are only 2 people who made it to the university. And that is a very rigged system. And this is why it is rigged. Because it means if I have money, what I would do, I would take my kid to a prestigious academy. I want you to get this. Once I've taken this kid to a prestigious academy, there is nothing wrong with spending on your family or spending your hard-earned money to give your kids the best education. Nothing wrong. I am using this illustration to take you to the university funding model so that you see how wicked it was. So I have some money. Let's say I'm a civil servant. I have access to loans. So I get money. I take my kid not to public primary school. If it is public, it has to be a very good public like the ones you see in Utawala, etc. So I take my kid to a very expensive academy where I'm paying maybe 300,000. This kid gets a very good mark. And where does the kid land? Maybe in Alliance. What is the ratio of people who go to university from Alliance? It is 90%. 90% of students who sit for examination in schools like Alliance, in national schools, have a chance of going to the university. So I got my kid to national school, which takes them to the university. Now, when they reach the university, because they came there with good marks, they also get the best courses because the courses were being awarded based on the marks. Still, they are. So these are going to be the doctors, they are going to be the engineers, they are going to be the lucrative courses, if you may. But here's the funny part. Whereas I could pay for this kid in an expensive academy, all of a sudden, when they reach the university, they deserve a scholarship from government. The poor person in Kiandutu in Thika is supposed to now give their hard-earned cash in the name of taxes to sponsor the kid of a minister who used a certain method to find themselves in the university. Ruto said, this is not what education is meant to do. Education, ladies and gentlemen, is supposed to be an equalizer. That is very important. It is education that is supposed to be an equalizer. In fact, that is the reason why people put on uniform. In other countries, they don't do. I've visited some countries, and in some countries, they don't do uniform. But in Kenya and most countries in Africa, they do uniform. And the reason behind the uniform is that education is supposed to be an equalizer. It doesn't matter where you came from. You're supposed to have a fair chance. So somebody who goes to some nondescript primary school, they barely pass, find themselves in some secondary school that does not exist after the 4 years they are there. And God works in mysterious ways, and they make it to the university. When they reach there with their C+, they are not considered the first, yet they are the poorest. So William said, we are not going to do that. We are going to have a system that does not fund the university. It funds the student. So you don't give block capitation to a university. You don't just say, this is Nairobi University, this is the money that is for you. Now, see how you are going to fund these kids. No, it would be the kids who come from poor families will get 95% of government help. Those who come from rich families, the government is not going to leave you. Only that the government will still support you if you want to, but most of it will be loan. You will not get a lot in scholarship. So you understand why the people who had rigged the system were not happy. But what they didn't realize is that the earlier system, ladies and gentlemen, was seeing our universities almost collapsing. There were 12 universities that were almost public universities that were almost closing their doors. And do you know how much universities like Kemu, which are private universities, were owed by government? A lot of money. So the system that existed did not serve the kids and did not serve the universities. It was only what you would call a system of cartels, people who know how to get their kids to university, and then they relax as taxpayers take over. William said no. It was not well received as expected, but today, those universities that were almost closing their doors are not closing their doors anymore. And today, a kid who is from a poor family has a chance at university once they are there. And William didn't stop there, by the way. He said that these schools where they go to, these dilapidated schools, the funny schools that only see a Bunsen burner during exam, he said that they are going to make sure that there is an irreducible minimum, something that each and every primary should have, each and every secondary should have. So others, secondary schools will not be equal. World over, schools are never equal. Even universities are not equal. However, there is what we call irreducible minimum. There are things that a secondary school should have at least. And he said this is his goal. This will give a chance to those who come from poor families who go to day school to also have a chance at going to the university. And when they go there, the government is there to take care of them. Here is the sad statistic that I promised. That is not even sad, what I had explained. Here's the sad one. When they came up with the band 1, band 2, band 3, band 4, band 5, band 1 being that of people coming from families or household that do not get more than 5,000 per month. Guess what they could manage to get? 10%. I'm not kidding. People who come from poor family comprise only 10% of the total university students. So that is how bad the system was. Those who come from families that are earning less than 5,000 are only 10% of the student population you see in Kenya. And that tells you that that system that William Ruto was fighting, ladies and gentlemen, was a bad one. Because majority of Kenyans, according to Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, majority of Kenyans, as of today, we have 26 million Kenyans who are called multi-directional poor, meaning whichever angle you look at poverty, they are poor. And if you have that, ladies and gentlemen, you must come up with ways of ensuring that these poor people are uplifted from poverty, but in the meantime, they are supported by the government. I have dwelt on that a lot, but I was just telling you that President Ruto made major education reforms. The reason as to why I was dwelling on this is because this is one of the most misunderstood, but also one of the greatest reforms in the ministry or in the education sector. So we've done economy, we've done agriculture, and we've looked at education. Do we proceed or should we leave the rest for tomorrow? I take your silence as a nod that we proceed. Let me just up, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to the health, the SHA. So this is a very interesting one. And I say it's an interesting one because the first time somebody promised that we should have universal health care was when Kibaki took over. That was in 2002. So why was it not implemented? Well, the reason why the universal health care was not implemented is because people feared the repercussion. The leadership that we had feared the repercussions. They were like, if we implement this, What would the unionists say? What would the people in the health industry say? How are we going to destroy the status quo, something that has been existing for these years? But William Ruto and Uhuru Kenyatta said they were going to do this. If you can remember the big four, universal healthcare was one of them. So what did Uhuru do? Uhuru piloted this in some counties and then gave up and focused mostly on matters to do with BBI. William Ruto promised, ladies and gentlemen, that he was going to roll out universal healthcare no matter the consequences. It was extremely opposed in court, especially by court. But William Ruto found a way of maneuvering. And today, we have a universal healthcare. Somebody had asked me to explain SHA, and I will briefly explain it. So SHA is not the cover. SHA is the body that has the covers. It is just an authority. So SHA is a social health authority. The word social here means people pool together whatever they have to ensure that everybody has a fair chance. So SHA has 3 funds. And this is important to understand. SHA is not a replacement of NHIF. No. This is an authority. In this authority, there are 3 funds. One of those funds is replacing NHIF. It is important that we understand that. Because there are people who are like, but I have SHA. But SHA is not, no. SHA is the authority. So under that SHA, you have 3 funds. One is Primary Healthcare Fund. This one is supposed to take care of you, ladies and gentlemen, from home to level 3. And by home, I mean there are people who are called health promoters, universal health promoters, who are supposed to come to your home, and especially those who are in the rural, and help you with a few issues here and there, issues that don't require you going to a clinic or going to a hospital. Up to level 3. That is funded by what we call Primary Health Care Fund. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is free. So long as you have SHA, so long as you are registered on SHA, you are automatically qualified for the primary health care. This is important to understand. That is why the president has been wondering, why would you pay? Yet the government is paying for that. That primary health care fund is paid for by the taxpayers. It is not something that I need to contribute again. Level 3, from nyumbani up to level 3, that is taken care of. But let's say whatever it is that is ailing me requires the services of level 4, level 5, or level 6. Then the second fund kicks in. And this is what is called Social Health Insurance Fund. We call it SHIF, the one that replaced NHIF. So this one takes care of you from level 4 to level 6. Whatever it is that you're suffering from that cannot be taken care of in level 3 will be taken care of by SHIF. So SHIF, ladies and gentlemen, this one you contribute. And if you are employed, you contribute 2.75% of your salary. And that 2.7% of your salary is not part of the salary that will be taxed. So it is exempted from tax so that you are not taxed twice. If you are not employed, you are self-employed, they have a mean testing, which is going to look at how much you do earn. You put your phone number, they get your M-Pesa statement. How they do it, I don't know. But that thing is really good at deciding how much you need to pay. So when it decides you are 2.7%, it will tell you how much to pay. That is what we call the SHIF. Whatever it is you are contributing is for that second fund. The first fund is taken care of by government. But now let's say, ladies and gentlemen, whatever it is that you are suffering from has exhausted SHIF. Whatever you had contributed, the contract says this one cannot be taken care of by this SHIF. SHIF is limited to this. The third fund kicks in, and that is called it's called Emergency and Chronic Diseases Fund. So this is where you've gotten, God forbid, but you've been involved in an accident, or there is some emergency somewhere. You find yourself in hospital. There is no deposit that you're supposed to make before you are treated. You're supposed to be treated. Why? Because this third fund also is taken care of by government. You are not supposed to contribute to that. That means if you have an emergency, you're supposed to go to hospital and be treated. Now, these are not suggestions. These are things that are provided for in the law, because that SHA is created by 4 independent acts. And those acts are very clear. So this is not just some suggestion that you are supposed to know. It is provided for in the law that emergency and chronic diseases, you don't contribute for that. This is very important to understand SHA, because misinformation will make sure that you miss a lot, especially those who are contributing towards this fund. You need to know what you are entitled to. There was the second part. It was not just emergency. It was also the chronic. And this chronic, ladies and gentlemen, is now where you are looking at diseases that are terminal, diseases that are chronic. They have been with you for long. So your SHIF cannot successfully handle the pay. Things like cancer, they are really expensive. So that fund, the Emergency and Chronic Diseases Fund, kicks in. That one you don't contribute. And, they give up to 800K for cancer. Yes. Now, that may sound very little to you, but if you have an idea of what was being given before by NHIF, you would laugh. That is why people used to sell their property if you have cancer. But now it is being increased every now and then. And some mild things that are identified early enough can be taken care of easily by the emergency and chronic funds. So that is what SHA is about, ladies and gentlemen. And as of today, over 29 million people have registered. NHIF had only 7 million people. So this is not even double. This is more than triple. And so many Kenyans are joining this. And there are stories of people who have even opposed this SHA coming out and saying, oh, it worked. It did this for me. It did this. I never even paid a cent. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is what Ruto promised to do in terms of reviving our health. And I told you, over 100,000 universal community health promoters have been hired. They're supposed to be moving in the rurals of the rurals to help people who necessarily don't need to go to hospital. I hope that made sense, ladies and gentlemen. As I promised, we have to wind up. If you have a question on these subjects, feel free to ask, by the way, as we talk. And if you're finding value, like. If you're finding value, please like the video so that I can also know that you're finding value. Or is there something wrong and the audio? If there is nothing wrong, let us proceed to infrastructure. Another thing that the president promised was infrastructure. And I want to just join it with affordable housing. Yes, that is now what we are. You have a name like Dutchman Maize. Okay, that's very interesting. So we are at infrastructure. And as you know, today, the president is in Kisumu, is launching the Phase 2B in Kisumu. The SGR stopped at Suswa in around Naivasha there. And now the president was saying we need to open the country and connect it to Uganda and other neighbors like Rwanda, Burundi, and DRC. So the SGR is being expanded to Malaba. Actually, like I said, the president is currently in Kisumu to launch phase 2. The phase 2 will be, that is about SGR. I won't talk so much about it. Let me just talk about affordable housing, because this is something that the president promised he would continue with, not he will launch. Because by the time he was getting into power, Uhuru Kenyatta had promised the affordable housing in the Big Four. Yes, it was there in the Big Four. So the president said, I will pick it up, because Uhuru, like I said, abandoned it. Perhaps he wanted to build his Northland, but I digress. This affordable housing is actually not properly understood. It is something I have seen in other countries. If you go to, those of you who are watching from the US, if you are here, you can say hi. So those of you who are watching from the US, there is this place called Long Island. And so if you are in Long Island, there's a place called Long Island City, yeah. And there is serious affordable housing there. I'm not talking of few units, thousands of units there. You go to places like Singapore, of course, the houses are subsidized. The reason behind affordable housing, ladies and gentlemen, is simple. Do two things. One, get people out of slums. That is very important. Give people decent housing. In Kenya, I want to shock you. There are over 1,000 slums. There is no urban center in Kenya, however small, that does not have a slum. And so, if you have 1,000 slums in a country like Kenya, what that means is you have over 7 million Kenyans living in very, very poor conditions. Conditions that are worse than what is expected of a human being. But that is where they are living. If you go to Kibra, if you go to places like Korogocho, you go to Mukuru, you would see how people live below average in very shanty places. And so the president was saying, these are Kenyans, they deserve dignity. That is the first reason behind affordable housing. I will come to how those houses are categorized. The second reason for affordable housing is to create jobs. Every door you see there in that affordable housing, every window you see there has been done locally. That means there is a welder you know that is actually creating doors for affordable housing project. That is job. There are people who did quantity survey. There is a lot of people, not just the ones who are going to do the Koroga. There is a lot of people working there. Currently, over 300,000 people are working in this affordable housing projects. And remember, they are all over the country. So it was get people out of slums. That is literally not improve slums, eradicate slums. And two, create jobs. That is what Ruto promised. Ladies and gentlemen, is it true that we have affordable housing? We do. Are people getting into these houses from slums? We've seen that for ourselves. Do we have jobs? We have seen thousands of people working there. Perhaps people you know actually work there or supply there or whatever it is. So, how are these affordable houses categorized? So that it is fair. Because there are people who are saying Ruto is raiding our payslip to build houses that we don't need. I have told you the purpose for these houses: to get people out of slums. You have 7 million Kenyans. You can't say you don't need to get out of slum. Those are 7 million Kenyans who are in slums. And you have as many jobless youth as possible. And so creating jobs for them cannot be something you don't need. The houses are divided, ladies and gentlemen, into three categories. Those who earn less than 5,000, less than 20,000, that is. These people are categorized under social housing. So the houses you usually see thousands getting into in Mukuru, in Homa Bay. The other day you were seeing that in Western and part of Rift Valley. Those are what we call social housing. These are people whose earning is below 20,000. Some people are earning even 5,000 or less. And for them, they don't have to make a deposit. They don't have to apply through other methods. These are just people who are living in the slum nearby, and they are picked and put there. The rest will wait. How much do they pay? For a one bedroom, these people would be paying equivalent to perhaps what they were paying in a shanty. In some shanties, you pay up to 3,000 for a tin house. So there in a one bedroom that is furnished, that is very important to name there, that those houses are furnished. They have fridge, they have what, everything you want, including beds. You just carry your bag and get into them. Dignity. So that is social housing for the poor of the poor. They don't pay any deposit. They just pay some small money to end up owning these houses later. Then we have affordable housing. That is the second category. This is for people who earn up to 150,000. If it is available. If it is available. Is the internet there? Is the internet there? You can hear me? Okay, I can see. Here in Mombasa, I'll be sampling the comments very shortly. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you have up to 150,000, you apply for affordable housing. Then we have the third category, those who are earning more than 150,000, those whose income is more than 150,000. Those ones go for what we call market rate. So you have three categories of affordable houses. You have social, the poor of the poor. They don't pay any deposit. They just get in, pay some little money until they own the house. Then you have those who wanajiweza kidogo, they have some money up to 150,000. These ones, ladies and gentlemen, they will, they're allowed to go to Boma Yangu, apply for the house they want. Once they reach 5%, they get into that house. An example, I come from Homa Bay County. There are affordable houses there. What I did, I can't apply for social. Not that I'm rich, but they said I'm not one of the poor of the poors. So I apply for affordable. What they will want from you as you apply for these houses is a bank statement or M-Pesa statement for the past 6 months. And that is going to decide whether you are at the affordable or are you with the market rate. Market rate are those who now can afford more than 150,000 per month. Their prices are different. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that made sense. If you have questions about housing, you can ask in the comment section. I will answer them before we wind up. But I believe under infrastructure and housing, William Ruto made promises that currently he has delivered. You can see those houses. They are not imaginary. People are getting into them. A promise made, a promise kept, ladies and gentlemen. Finally, let me talk about, before I sample some of the questions, allow me to talk about the digital economy. And this is something I'm passionate about. Why? Because there is this data that Kenyans spend the most time on social media in the entire world. I am not making this up. Kenyans spend the most time on social media in the entire world. And so, as such, ladies and gentlemen, this thing should pay them. But remember, Kenya was not monetized. There are so many people who are on Meta, or Facebook, that is. who were producing content, but there is no way they were going to be monetized. So some people had to use other means, like register an account in UK with a friend, so that there are the people logging in for you. A lot of problems. William Ruto, through direct approach, talked to Meta, and Kenya is now one of the few countries in Africa that are monetized, even though the payment is little, because some people don't understand how uh, online activities are paid for. The belief was that if you are now monetized, you are going to make a lot of. There is a big challenge. One day, if you want, I can walk you through how online views are paid for, both on YouTube, even on Meta, and even on X. So today we are monetized, but that is beside the point. There is this thing we are calling digital hubs. The other day they were opening another one in in Bondo, and people were mocking it. But these digital hubs have a very strategic agenda. The agenda is, you are from school, you know something about computers. Instead of just wasting time on social media, maybe trolling people and other things, why not go to a digital hub, look for remote jobs, do something and earn your money? Because those remote jobs, ladies and gentlemen, do exist. I know people who made a lot of money by doing online writing for blogs or even for other people. There is what they also call academic writing, though it's illegal, but there are people who lived off it, especially those who are in university or left university, would be doing something for other people from other countries. I'm saying it is illegal. But I was just telling you, these digital hubs are giving access, and they're supposed to be built in each and every ward, by the way. And the MPs are the ones building them. They have been told it is being built by part of the CDF. You're building one per ward, so that technology is brought closer. But the digital hub is not just for remote jobs. Remember, the government made sure that most of the government services are available online through e-citizen. And it is not that everybody has a phone, everybody has. That is why those digital hubs also exist, so that I can go to my ward nearest digital hub, go and access NTSA and other things that I wanted to access through that digital hub. So it is very important. It's for job and also access to government services. It's like what Huduma Center was doing to people, but now digitally. Huduma centers were bringing government services to you. Now, these digital hubs are also bringing government services, but digitally. And as far as government services are concerned, over 15,000 government services are already online. And guess what? E-citizen that was collecting, I don't know, 300,000 is now collecting 60, was collecting 60 million, is now collecting 1 billion shillings per day. The word here is per day. You should hear that. 50 is collecting 1 billion shillings per day. So it has cut corruption, and it's making sure that services are available to you easily as a citizen. Ladies and gentlemen, this digital economy and labor mobility also include those Kenyans who are applying to go and work elsewhere. William Ruto had promised during his campaign, during the campaign period, that he will ensure that Kenya's foreign exchange is revamped. And how is he going to do that? Ensuring that we have people working outside the country. I want to give you an example with 2 countries, and this will shock you. If you have your phone, you can Google how much Philippines makes from foreign remittance. You can just Google that. It's a simple thing to Google. How much Philippines made, and you can just comment with the answer. So that you see the reason behind labor mobility is very important. How much? Just type and then answer there. How much? Just Philippines, and then you use Egypt. Also, you can even use Egypt as an example. How much Philippines? Hmm. From foreign remittance. In 2025. How much? That is 2024. In 2024, EMs, they made 34 billion. And yes. Now, if they made $34 billion, how much do you think is that in Kenya shillings? That is a lot of money. And Philippines is making this money because they export labor. Most of the Filipinos are working in Qatar. They are working in the US. They are known as the maids. But what they are doing, ladies and gentlemen, they are taking money to that country. In fact, the economy of Philippines depends on that foreign remittance. Egypt is also ranging at around 20-something billion dollars. Those are trillions in Kenya shillings, ladies and gentlemen. That is just coming in the form of foreign remittance. And that stabilizes your currency in ways. Kims is saying 35, yes, in 2025. So even Egypt, even if you checked Egypt, that is what Ruto is aiming with this. Some people are like, oh, he's exporting our people to go and work. Even before William Ruto came, in fact, EM says that Egypt looks like it has passed Philippines. Yes. 41 billion US dollar. I don't want to ask you to calculate that in Kenya shillings, but that is a lot of money in Kenya shillings. So this was the goal. The goal is, if you know very well that you don't have the capacity to create jobs, and ladies and gentlemen, I know it's late, but hear this. If you know that you don't have capacity to create enough jobs for your people, it is your constitutional duty as a president to look for jobs for these people elsewhere. I was seeing a country like Morocco. Almost every member of their national team is actually playing in Europe. Almost every member. Now, that is not by a mistake. That is by design. How much do those people bring back home in hard currency? A lot. So the intention here was, if William Ruto can't, in the meantime, create enough jobs, and by the way, it is almost impossible to create enough jobs. If you even have Americans who are working in Kenya as expatriates, we have them here. So there is no country that can say they have zero joblessness. There's no such country. If you can't create jobs, enough jobs for your people, you look for how they can work out there. What Ruto was saying he cannot tolerate is where Kenyans are shipped, are smuggled. That was painful. That we only hear about Kenyans when they have been murdered, when they have been brutalized, when they are being treated like dogs. Ruto said, moving forward, every Kenyan who is leaving Kenya to go and work will be leaving through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Labor. We must know who you are, where you are going to work, who you are going to work for, and how much they are supposed to pay you. And our embassy in that country must know where you are, so that you are not treated. Working as a maid is not a problem. People are like, you are sending them to work as maid when... No. Working as a maid, people have worked as maid. That Philippines that you saw raking in $35 billion, most of those people are working as housekeepers. Those who are in the US, you can confirm. Those who are in Qatar, you are in Dubai, you can confirm. Most of these people, even in Europe, they work as housekeepers, to the point that they are just known as maids. But how much are they taking home? What Ruto was saying, even if we are taking you out there, we are going to negotiate. They went and negotiated with those countries. Even if we are taking you out there, ladies and gentlemen, we want you to be working there in dignity. It doesn't matter what you are doing, whether you are driving, whether you are cooking for people, whether you are a mechanic, whether you are a doctor, whether you are a nurse. We have so many Kenyans who are working as nurses in the US. It doesn't matter what you are doing. We just want to know where you are working and make sure that you are protected by our embassy and our agreements. And currently, if you go to labor website, you will find the jobs listed there. Kenyans are taking advantage of this. And according to their data there, over 150,000 Kenyans have gone out there. That is still very small. You can't compare that with the number of Egyptians who are working outside the country. There are many. Now, we are not saying that we are exporting everyone. The idea here, ladies and gentlemen, okay, the idea here is that we want a situation that where Kenyans can find job and also grow our economy. I hope I covered most of the things. Allow me to shortly go through your questions, and then we wind up. Am I still visible? Am I still audible? Can I get one person? Because today the system was trying to work against me. Anyone who can comment? Am I still visible? Okay. So let me just sample some of your questions or comments, and then we wind up. Okay. Wow. Okay, let me see if there's a question. There's somebody who's saying you can be president. There's that 2.0. You can be president by name, but in reality you are nothing. Raila would have been a good for nothing president because angekuwa amekamatiwa chini. Yeah, Uhuru wanted a puppet. And thank God he didn't get that. And also thank God that Raila Odinga decided that he was going to work with William Ruto because their ideologies were almost the same. He said that. I didn't say that. Sean Mende, it is amazing to see the way President Ruto stabilized and revived the Kenyan economy when Uhuru left it at its knees. Thank you. The camera has issues. Check your camera. No video. Many people have not read the Kenya plan to see what the promises were and timeliness for delivery. The president is very organized. Yes. Oh, this is when I was sharing something. I hope now I'm visible. Okay, we can't see anything. When you share something, it goes dark. Okay. Okay, the net was low. The internet misbehaved. But I hope you found value. If you did, like the video, share it with friends, and let's meet the next one. Thank you.